Hello.
Can you hear me okay?
Sure can. It looks like right now we have 8 participants.
Yay.
So that's exciting. I want to welcome people who we can't see to this evening's event. This is the Trout Gallery Pizza on the Plaza goes virtual. So this is an event we've all been really excited about, and we thank you for joining us for our first virtual event of the season. So Bianca, what are you particularly looking forward to tonight?
I am just looking forward to the Q&A. I am so excited to hear from other people, and I feel like the Trout students have had so many good conversations as the semester has been getting off the ground, and so I'm really excited to see everyone else who we've been missing.
Yeah, me too. And one of the things that's been exciting for me about this evening is that I've heard from alumni who worked at the Trout Gallery who are excited to be able to step back into the Trout Gallery circle and take part in an event. So I guess one of the pluses of the virtual world that we now live in is that we are getting to reconnect with a lot of people that we might not have otherwise. So Jackie Amasqua, if you're out there, I'm waving hello to you this evening.
And as you guys enter the meeting, feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. Definitely let us know who you are and where you're coming from.
Yeah, throughout the evening, we will encourage you to use the chat feature to introduce yourselves, and also if you're having any technical difficulties. So if you can't see us for some reason, please let us know in the chat. We have one of our student assistants who will be monitoring the chat and is ready to help you if you have any problems. Be sure you're using the chat for that purpose. I see we already have a Q&A, and one of the questions that's right now in the Q&A, Bianca, is actually, where are you? One of our visitors wants to visit you there.
I want to go here too. This is my first time using a Zoom virtual background, and I kind of love it. Maybe I'll just use it for everything now. This is our inspiration for the evening, which is the 2001 remodel of the original Cabaret Voltaire nightclub in Zurich. It looks really fun. I got to hunt down some images of it today, and I think I need to make a trip as soon as possible.
I think you do too.
Yeah.
That looks like a lot of fun. So I think that one of the things that we're experimenting with tonight is how to continue to try to connect with our audiences in this new virtual environment. And I'm really excited to see that we had so many people register for this evening's event. And I'm particularly excited to hear from people during our Q&A section. So again, if you're just joining us, please use the chat to say hello. Tell us your name and where you're joining us from. We'd love to have a sense of who our audience is tonight, and I know that our speakers would as well. As we were getting ready for tonight, one of the things we talked about was how we miss the sort of interactions that we normally have with our audiences, getting to see you, to hear from you. So we would very much so love to hear from you this evening. So please be sure to use the Q&A for questions you have for the speakers, and the chat used to introduce yourselves, and also to let us know if you're having any technical problems. So I'm excited to see that our attendees are joining now, our panelists are joining now. So we have everybody in attendance. I think one of the things that is really great about tonight's event is that it features the voices of primarily students and alumni. So as Bianca will introduce our speakers, but at the Trout Gallery, we have a core of usually around 18 or 20 students that work with us on our exhibitions and our programming, and their voices are crucial to helping us to engage with our audiences, as you might imagine, particularly our college audiences. And so we have two students who are working virtually at the Trout Gallery this semester, and they'll be speaking. And then we also have Maddie Boyce from the farm, recent graduate, and you're going to hear from her as well. And so it's, I think, exciting to have student voices talking about art, but also talking about life today. Everyone has lived through a really tumultuous time the past few months, and the end is not in sight. And I think having opportunities for us all to come together, to talk about our experiences, to share the insights that we've gained, the growth maybe that we've had over the past few months is really important. And while our Dickinson students can't all be together having these conversations in person, we hope that events such as this provide a forum for Dickinson students to connect with each other and talk about these crucially important issues.
Yeah, absolutely. I can't believe this is our first virtual event. I'm so excited.
And I don't know how many virtual events all of you have been to, but I've been to some really great ones. So I feel like the bar is high, but I've also really enjoyed some of the experiences I've had, and I have got to connect with people I normally wouldn't be able to connect with in really interesting ways. And so we're hoping to continue that a little bit this evening with all of you.
Hi, Maddie. Hi, Bethany.
My boyfriend just got back with the farm pizza, so.
Yeah.
Yay! Yeah, Bianca and I got an email from Susan Rose shortly before I started. Susan's faculty here at Dickinson, and she let us know she had just picked up her pizza. So we are imagining that she's enjoying her pizza and hope to see her soon.
Yes. Thank you, everyone also who came and picked up your pizza. I also got to meet some people that I met at a meeting, at a virtual meeting earlier today. So it was nice to say hello in person. So Bethany, how was the pizza?
Oh, sorry, go ahead. I'm talking over you.
No, you're fine. I just wanted to see how the pizza was. Oh, Carl says loving the eggplant pizza. Yay!
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm lactose intolerant, so I don't usually eat pizza, but the farm pizza is just too good. I have to.
I was telling Maddie when we were handing out pizzas a little bit ago, last week at the farmer's market, if you didn't get a pizza today, you can go see the farm at the farmer's market and pick up a pizza from them there. And I had one last week. It was delicious. It was like all kinds of veggies and some balsamic glaze on it. It was really good.
So Bethany and Maddie and Claire, do you guys want to introduce yourselves in the chat just so everybody has double, they'll hear about you from Bianca, but then they'll also have a chance to look back and remember who you are. Thank you. It's great to hear from people. Looks like we're up to 23 participants. So hopefully you all can see the number of participants in the bottom of your screen. That's one of the ways to feel the excitement of the evening, even though we can't see all of our faces in the webinar format, but we're excited that you're all here, and we're hoping that you'll get to hear from more of the attendees as our evening unfolds. Like I said, everybody will have the opportunity to join us in the Q&A afterwards. We encourage you to participate. This is all about hearing from you. We're excited to know what you're thinking about some of the issues presented this evening. So use the Q&A for your comments, for your questions, for the panelists. And we'll ask you to use the chat to introduce yourselves. If you want to just say, hi, here's my name. I'm from, in this case, I'm Heather, Curator of Education at the Trout Gallery, and I'm in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. So I am joining us from where Dickinson is. Not all of our speakers tonight are. We have speakers that will be joining us from New York City, from Carlisle, two from Carlisle. But they too are sort of somewhat spread out. So yeah, tell us your name and where you're joining us from.
And if you don't have a note-taking device, I totally recommend getting something to take notes so you can remember all the amazing questions that you have for the Q&A later.
I see that Donna Bickford has joined us. Hi, Donna. I will wave to you virtually. Donna Bickford, also a professor at Dickinson, head of the Women and Gender Center here. And it's great to have her joining us this evening. I see some more of our student assistants. Jackie Mesqua, who is a Dickinson alum, former Trout Gallery employee, has joined us. So it's exciting to see. Maria Bruno, another faculty member at Dickinson, all kinds of people coming into the webinar now. So thank you all so much for coming this evening. We really appreciate it. I know that in a COVID world, you are saturated with web time and computer time, and sometimes the last thing you want to do at the end of the day is get back on a computer. So I thank you for making the time, putting in the effort to join us tonight. I think these are going to be really important conversations that we're going to have, and I think it's a wonderful opportunity to hear from Dickinson students, from our educator at the farm, what their perspectives are on a lot of the issues that we're going to be talking about. So thank you, everyone.
Hey, Heather, I just wanted to jump in and say that I forgot that in the chat you have to select you're replying to all panelists and attendees. So my initial message just went out to all the panelists. So if you see that your message is also just going out to all the panelists, you can, when you open the chat box, select the blue all panelists and attendees if you want everyone to see the message.
Thank you, Bethany. I have to say one of the best things about having so many Dickinson students work for us at the Trout Gallery is that they're constantly teaching us how technology works. Anything else that you think of, reminders, some of our audience may be new to the Zoom webinar format, so tips for how to navigate and find things would be really great as well. I'm excited to see more people in the chat are introducing themselves. If you are comfortable, if you could just let us know your name in the chat and where you're joining us from tonight. We'd love to have a better sense of who our audience is. I see we're getting a lot of hellos to Professor Bruno. I think we have some Professor Bruno fans or students in the audience. Oh, and we have Barry Ann and Joe George from Carlisle. So hi, Barry Ann. Hi, Joe. Thanks so much for joining us. For those of you that don't know Joe and Barry Ann, they are our local art critics. So we are extremely lucky in Carlisle, Pennsylvania to have probably one of the best small town newspaper art criticism columns in the country, thanks to Barry Ann and Joe. I always say that I want their social life. They're constantly at exhibition openings and museums in the area. They're the first to know what's happening in the arts in the community, and it's wonderful to have them as part of our community.
Yeah, they've already taught me so much about what to go see and where I should go, and the newest exhibitions. It's awesome.
Carrie Bresci is also on the line, she's in the call, and she is in her art studio here in Carlisle. She has the ultimate she shed art studio. It makes everyone jealous. So she is wonderful in our community. She sort of specializes in the art of community engagement, how you use the arts. So really excited to see her here tonight. Also, Carol Reed, she is a wonderful supporter of the arts in this town, an incredible artist in her own right. I have several of her pieces in my house. I am proud to say I have one of the largest Carol Reed art collections in the country. So really excited to see her joining us tonight as well.
38 people on. I think we had a few more people who are registering.
As we speak.
What'd you say, Heather?
I said as we speak, people are registering.
I love it.
I want to greet Professor Rathburn, who is a new professor of organic chemistry here at Dickinson. Hello, I'm Heather. Thanks for joining us. Welcome to Dickinson. Love to see that you're a contemporary art enthusiast. We're definitely going to be talking about very contemporary art tonight. So welcome. Thanks for joining us. Oh, students from across the country. So this is exciting. We have students that are joining us from Vermont. We have students here in Pittsburgh. We have students, some of them I can't tell where they're from, Connecticut. So this is great. It's great to see students from across the country. All right, so how are we doing? Do we feel like we're maybe about ready to get started, Bianca? What do you think?
Yeah, I think so. And people can just pop in whenever they're ready. Bethany and Maddie, you guys think you're ready? Okay, awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for being here tonight. Welcome to Pizza on the Plaza. It is our first virtual event of the semester, which is really exciting. If you don't know me, my name is Bianca Martucci-Fink. I am the Communications and Events Coordinator here at the Trout Gallery. And also from the Trout, we have our Curator of Education, Heather Flaherty. So tonight, we are hosting essentially a mashup event, meaning that we're going to look at two topics selected by different speakers, and the audience, you all, are going to engage in a follow-up conversation, drawing connections between these two topics. The mashup format that we have is inspired by the Cabaret Voltaire, which is a famous nightclub that was founded in 1916 in Zurich. The 2001 renovation is my Zoom background for the night, so I think you can still go there. The club was originally known for its political and artistic performances. The founders of the club, the artists that performed there, actually laid the basis for the art movement known as Dada, which questioned everything, including long-standing assumptions about violence, war, and nationalism. So our mashup tonight will have this structure. So we'll have two 15-minute talks, one from the Dickinson College Farm on race, agriculture, and farming. And then the next presentation we'll see is from Trout Gallery student interpreters, which focus on the art and social protests, specifically on Kara Walker's Harper's Pictorial History of the Civil War, which is a show that's actually coming to the Trout Gallery in person fall of 2021. And we'll also be talking about the role of art in the Black Lives Matter protests that we're seeing across the country. So both of these talks arose organically as the staff and the Dickinson College Farm considered their own lives and work experiences as we kind of examine and acknowledge systemic racism in contemporary America. At the close of these 2 15-minute talks, we will open the conversation to you all. We challenge you to be participants. Typically in a live mashup, we offer you pencil and paper so you can kind of keep track of the themes and all your ideas. But tonight, definitely have some type of note-taking device handy. We trust you guys. And that way the Q&A will be a lot easier for us all. So we want to hear from you. Please don't be shy. We want to know the types of connections that you discover, your responses to the ideas and thoughts that we see in the presentations, and what kinds of questions you have for our speakers. So I'm going to introduce our speakers really quick. We have Maddie Du Bois, the Education and Outreach Coordinator for the Dickinson College Farm. She was an environmental science and Spanish double major at Dickinson and graduated this past May. In the second half, we'll hear from Trout Gallery students. We have Kayla Burke-Ozuna, a senior Spanish major with a minor in creative writing, and Bethany Petrunik, a junior art history major with a philosophy minor. So I'll begin the presentations now, and then after the presentations, I'll give you guys some more instructions for the Q&A. And just a reminder, if you're having any technical trouble or you need us to know anything, definitely put those questions or comments in the chat. We have Trout Gallery staff who will be monitoring that for you all. Okay, I'm going to share my screen here. And
Hi, my name is Maddie Du Bois, and I am the Education and Outreach Coordinator for the Dickinson College Farm this school year. I'm going to be talking to you guys a little bit about my summer working at the farm. And I know what you're thinking, like, summer working at the farm, like, that's not the Zoom call I signed up for. To that I say it's probably more exciting than a lot of Zoom calls you've been on. And I swear it's, like, related. Just bear with me. So a little introduction about myself first. I just graduated from Dickinson in May, and I was an environmental science and Spanish double major. Both of those majors and the classes I took in those majors, like agroecology and Spanish for the health professions, led me to become interested in agriculture. I didn't actually start doing any of the physical farming type stuff until my senior year. Turns out I liked it, and I ended up with this job and ended up here. One way COVID has changed my role as Education and Outreach Coordinator is that I spend a lot more time at the farm than I initially thought I would. I'm really grateful for this because I find that the physical aspects of farming, you can have a lot of time to just reflect and think. And once you, like, your body gets in the groove of whatever you're doing, you can let your mind wander. And I had a lot to think about over the summer. I started working at the farm at the beginning of June, and I know it's really hard to remember, like, what day of the week it is these days, but if you can remember, end of May, beginning of June was around the time where a lot of the Black Lives Matter protests were starting to get bigger and more publicized. Right after the death of George Floyd. Of course, this was the culmination of many murders and violence against Black people, like Breonna Taylor, and most recently last week with Jacob Blake. So starting my job, I had COVID to think about. I had this, like, the Black Lives Matter protests were happening. There was a lot to think about, and didn't really expect to be talking about it too much at the farm. However, I did. So the first day at the farm, we had a meeting with the managers and the apprentices and myself, and talking about regular stuff like who's cleaning the bathroom this week. And then at the end of the meeting, one of the apprentices brought up, like, all the Black Lives Matter protests happening, and if we want, how we could make it a space where people feel comfortable to talk about it. And we did, and you know, I think everyone from apprentices to students felt comfortable talking about the protests and going out to protest while we were at the farm. And we also decided, hey, maybe it's a good idea to put out a message in solidarity. I'm in charge of the newsletter, so it's like, yeah, like, let's do it. And we put together a doc. People put in resources and different ideas they had of things we could put in. And we ended up putting a message of solidarity saying, Black Lives Matter, and also going through to show how a lot of the systemic racism that has played a part in a lot of the violence towards Black people that we're seeing also play a role in our food systems. So I learned a lot about that by going through the document and putting it together for the newsletter, but I had not necessarily learned a lot about that in a formal academic setting. And so I decided, I think I want to look more into this. So I borrowed a copy of one of the apprentices' copies of Farming While Black by Leah Penniman. She runs Soul Fire Farms up in New York, I believe. And I only got the chance to read the introduction before I had to give it to someone else. But during that introduction, it was reading the introduction alone was super eye-opening. And so reading through the introduction, I definitely learned a lot about the role of Black people in farming, over in the U.S. over the course of history. And yeah, it made me think about, oh my God, there's a spider. Okay. I never got much formal education about the roles of Black people in agriculture in the United States. I remember back in elementary school, the only time we really learned about Black people and their contributions to society was for a day or a week during Black History Month. And I have a few memories from that, and one being everyone would ask if I was related to W.E.B. Du Bois, and I would say no. And the second memory I probably have is learning about George Washington Carver and how he did stuff with peanuts, maybe made peanut butter. After reading the introduction to Farming While Black a month ago, so it was 15 years later, I finally realized that whoa, Dr. Carver did a whole lot more than just play around with peanuts. He was a professor at Tuskegee University and did a lot of research in sustainable agriculture practices like crop rotation, for example, which is a practice we use at the college farm. Also this summer, so I was passing out the community or campus supported agriculture shares every Friday, and I never really thought, what's the CS, where did the CSA come from? More and more, another professor at Tuskegee University back in the day, Dr. Booker T. Watley, is more and more credited with coming up with the structure of a CSA. So it really made me think about reading that introduction alone really made me think about kind of the blind spots I've had in my education growing up, and kind of leading me to realize that farming really isn't just a white thing. There's been a lot of contributions by Black people over history. It's just they're not really haven't been talked about or properly credited. I guess it really made me realize how kind of skewed the narrative on U.S. agriculture is, and that it's, kind of, at least my own perception of it being a very white, dominated profession, one that's not really true, and there's been a lot of Black people that have made significant contributions to sustainable agriculture. So that was a part of my own personal learning, and I think that continued throughout the summer. during the summer at the farm, we had Monday educational lessons, and we wanted to do one kind of on the topic of race and agriculture, but we didn't really have anyone to do that. So one student stepped up and said she'd be willing to, with the help of others, lead a lesson on the topic. And so we all came together, like 5 of us at the farm, to create a lesson. I ended up working on the timeline portion of the lesson with the student farmer, and together, we came up with a timeline of kind of significant events related to race and agriculture in the U.S. Over time. So during the time of coming up with the lesson, I took the time to kind of educate myself even more about the connection between race and agriculture, but going more back to the time of slavery, Civil War era. Okay. So agriculture was a huge part of slavery. A lot of enslaved Africans were, exploited to produce all these crops, big ones like tobacco and cotton. Once crops like tobacco were less valuable and harder to grow, crops like cotton became super common to use. There was, I think, pressure from Britain to create cotton, and there was also the machine called the cotton gin that came around that made it easier to process cotton, and so that increased the need for enslaved Africans to run plantations and create cotton. So that's an interesting connection between kind of agriculture and the continuation of slavery in the U.S. Even after slavery, cotton was still grown, and in 1862, I think it was around the time of the Civil War, the USDA was created. And the USDA is a great example of how systemic racism affects marginalized groups. So the USDA was, the United States Department of Agriculture was created to kind of oversee farming and food. However, it definitely disproportionately affected, black farmers and other farmers of other marginalized groups. For example, they made it incredibly hard for black farmers to get loans and obtain land and maintain their farms. And they're also kind of more and more attributed with the decrease of black farmers in the U.S. over the past 100 years. So we included information like this and other historical events. This is just part of it, and I'm no expert on any of this. This is all stuff I've learned over the summer by reading different articles and books. But we presented this, and I think all of this kind of research prompted me to think more critically about my place in agriculture and my own family ties to it. So as I mentioned, farming leaves a lot of time for reflection, and I was able to think a little more about how my grandmother grew up on a farm in Texas, a cotton farm, her family's cotton farm. She ended up, I learned recently because of asthma, moving to her aunt's house and going to pursue an education. And I grew up with her, and she'd always tell me, education is super important. You're gonna get your education, and I just find it funny that she worked hard, to get her education. And I ended up back on a farm where she left to go and pursue that. So I had plenty of time over the course of the summer to think about that. And my friend asked me a question about what does your grandmother think about you doing farming now? And I was like, well, I can't really ask her that. She passed away, but at first I was like, man, maybe I'm not really I'm kind of like betraying all that she told me. Like, she worked so hard to get an education, and now I'm just like going back to farming. But the more I like learn about all these contributions to agriculture by Black people, I think it's less like a betrayal, and more of kind of honoring that, and making sure, like, taking opportunities like this to make sure that the contributions of Black people to agriculture and stuff are heard. And so there was a quote in the introduction of Farming While Black that I think kind of reflects how I feel about still farming, and it's like this. So to farm while Black is an act of defiance against white supremacy and a means to honor the agricultural ingenuity of our ancestors. And so, yeah, I've realized it's not, betraying my grandmother or my ancestors before her who were probably slaves, but it's kind of honoring where we've come from, and like changing the narrative of what Black people can contribute to agriculture. Thank you all for listening today about my summer at the farm. I hope you got something out of it. I really encourage you to kind of do what I did and take the time, if you feel so inclined, to kind of research this and change your perceptions about agriculture and who runs it and who it's for. I've only shared a small part of it, and I hope you feel compelled to keep looking into it. Again, I'm no expert on these topics, but I hope you'll still be able to make connections between this and the other talks this evening. So, thank you.
Hello, everyone. I'm Bethany. I'm a junior art history major at Dickinson, and I'm actually from Carlisle, so I'm a local student. I've been working at the Trout Gallery for a little over a year now as an educator for K through 12, as well as developing curriculum for our current shows. Right now, I'm working on research and curriculum development for an exhibition we are hosting by the contemporary artist Carol Walker called Harper's Pictorial History of the Civil War Annotated. The show was scheduled to be open right now at the Trout Gallery, but due to COVID-19, it has been rescheduled for next fall. Still, the show is so important for discussions of race in America that the Trout Gallery decided to vote both this semester and next fall to programs and events that highlight the show. This evening, I'm going to be giving you a little introduction to the show before talking about Carol Walker's work and how I see it related to art activism. Then my coworker, Kayla Burke-Uzena, is going to share some of her personal experiences with art activism this past summer in New York City. So, I first heard about the artist Carol Walker when I was a senior in high school. I was taking AP Art History, and we had finally gotten to my favorite unit, which is contemporary art. I chose her piece, Darkytown Rebellion, which is pictured here, to give a presentation on to my fellow students. I didn't know anything about her yet, but I knew I was so intrigued and stunned by her unique visual language, and I wanted to know more. I was so excited when I heard we would be getting some of Walker's works at the Trout Gallery, and even though we're not physically on campus right now to see her work yet, I'm going to give you a little introduction to her and the work we will have in our show for fall of 2021. So Carol Walker was born in 1969 in California. Her father was a professor of art and moved the family to Georgia while she was still young. She attended school there and felt the lasting effects of Jim Crow in the South. She notes this experience and the big change in culture she experienced moving from California to the South as moments that began to inform her own ideas of racism and later on her artwork. Walker studied art at Atlanta and then went on to get her master's from the Rhode Island School of Design. She was held in high regard from early on in her career and won many prestigious awards and recognition for her innovative use of silhouettes. However, she was also met with a lot of criticism for her use of racial stereotypes and the way that her work centered around the antebellum South. Some Black artists felt as though she was continuing to inflict the pain that the images of racial stereotypes caused instead of condemning them as racist. Walker's series, Harper's Pictorial History of the Civil War Annotated, takes images from an illustrated history of the Civil War produced by Harper's, the same publisher who also produced a very popular weekly magazine, and disrupts the white-centric history told in the book. Harper's book brings attention to the narratives being told. The original book contains hundreds and hundreds of images of important white individuals who took part during the Civil War, as well as stories of significant battles and victories for both the Union and Confederate armies. However, the book appears to leave out the rather important topic of slavery, which is essential to the discussions when retelling the history of the Civil War. It also tells the story of the Civil War from a purely white perspective, ignoring the experiences of African Americans during the war. So Walker's annotations of the original images raise questions like whose stories are considered in history and whose stories are left out. Using the context told in Harper's from the source images featured, as well as her own imagination, Walker reinserts Black perspectives into Harper's telling of the Civil War. Using her signature stylized silhouettes, she forces the viewers to confront their own ideas of racism, which is highly effective in the museum environment where the histories of colonization, looting, and racism are intentionally veiled. When I was studying this series, I couldn't help but think about how Walker's work functions as a form of social activism. They take up space in whitewashed museums, forcing both the institution in which it exists in and the viewers to come to terms with what they're looking at. Her silhouettes work by making white people uncomfortable, by holding up a mirror to their own preconceptions, prejudices, and racist beliefs that have been internalized for so long. Walker says that, quote, "One of the themes in my work is the idea that a Black subject is the present tense, is a container for specific pathologies from the past and is continually growing and feeding off those maladies. Racist pathology is the muck." Walker's work seems to me to be a powerful form of activism. Her work is based in activism, in my mind, because it seeks to plant a seed of doubt in the viewer, leading to self-reflection and evaluation, and I hope change. While her work does not explicitly call out the viewer on their racist practices or beliefs, its visual style and content shocks the viewer and imprints the image on their mind, staying there long after the viewers leave the museum. While this form of art activism takes place within the museum institution, there are also other forms of art activism that take place in public places, specifically surrounding art created and used for protests. When my colleague Kayla and I first met to talk about our research and Carol Walker, Kayla made the immediate connection between Walker's work and her own experiences with art during this past summer's Black Lives Matter protests in New York City. Kayla is now going to share some of her personal experiences and reflections on art activism and protests over this past summer.
Kayla Brecozuna. I'm from New York City. I want to start by thanking all of you for being here with us, for having this conversation with us. We appreciate it a lot over here at the Trout Gallery. I'm just going to go ahead and start. As Bethany mentioned, we are sort of highlighting this theme of art as activism. And this summer in New York City, where protests have erupted in response to the unjust killings of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, just to, name a few. I've seen art serve my community and serve like the greater New York City as a way for people to collectively heal, but also to fight back in a space that feels safe and comfortable. And I just want to, speak to the fact that a summer bound by anger and sadness and frustration and fear, there's been a beautiful outcome where people use their morning to make art, and then that art to mobilize the movement, to rejuvenize everyone, to re-energize everybody to keep fighting for something that is ultimately bigger than ourselves. There's a kind of taboo that art can't really do anything. Art is just this like flimsy little activity to do to express your feelings, or to, you know, just sort of cry the emotions that you're feeling. But I've seen art be this very powerful and very strong aspect of the protest this summer, an aspect that if it wasn't there, it would have been a very different nature and a very different environment to the protest. But I'm going to show all of you some images that I took at the protest, some initiatives that I've seen that have really highlighted the importance of art, using it in a collective sphere, and also some images that I've created in response to the protest, and actually the protest being the direct inspiration to the images I was creating. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with you guys right here. This first image was at a protest at 42nd Street, and you can see, and you can see right here, it says Signs for Black Lives Matter, and underneath it says Create, Donate, Protest. So the whole initiative was that people created poster signs at home. All of these were created in people's individual homes, and people donated them that very day, and anybody at the protest was allowed to pick up any sign that, you know, spoke to them, called to them, and you just march with these protest signs. And what I found so beautiful about this initiative is that it brought together people that may never meet, may never speak to each other, might never know each other's stories, but yet they're all here to strengthen the community that has come together for these protests. And the whole idea that art is activism is that people are coming out and using their voice, exercising their rights to say what we want from our government, what we want in our society. And this is a beautiful way for people to hear different perspectives, to see other visions. And yeah, that's just one. This was happening at many different protests, but this was one at 42nd Street. So the second image is like a huge display of a graffiti artist in New York City that goes by the name Snowman. All summer, he had been making these poster signs, as well as delivering them to people all over, mostly uptown, but then also down in the Lower East Side. And if you had been in the city this summer, you will see that his signs were everywhere. They were at mostly like protests and rallies and demonstrations, but they were also all hung up in storefronts, in people's cars, in people's apartment windows. I have a couple at home like hung up on my wall. And what was so special about the Snowman's initiative was that he had these resources to make these signs, and he made them for free, and he made them sort of taking these slogans that were coming from the protest and just kind of blasting them in beautiful colors and loud colors, unapologetically. And he was tapping into a culture that he already had a lot of access to. So a lot of young people with these signs, a lot of them excited to see an artist that they know across the city representing a fight that they're fighting. So that's the second image. And this third one is my favorite. This is at Occupy City Hall that was taking place during the month of August. you can see sort of here in this little area, everything is just kind of scribbled on, but it says art therapy. And this was a station that was set up with, free poster boards, free cardboard, free markers, free watercolors, paint, oil pastels, like everything under the sun that you could create some art with were put down on the ground, tarps there. And, there were a couple people who were always at the station just saying, like, please use this time to express yourself, to let go and release some, tension you might be feeling. And what happened was you would see, a little girl like this with an older gentleman or a family or a couple or friends, and everyone here just collaborating to make something that they were sharing collectively, right? Like all these people here. And then there's these lasting images that capture what this time has meant for people. It's really easy for the times that we're going through right now to feel very isolated, to feel like you're going through what you're going through by yourself. And this art therapy station, I think, reminded everyone that we aren't doing this by ourselves. It's very important to rely on your community and to visualize what everyone's feeling inside and to see it out on a piece of paper, on a piece of cardboard, poster board, what have you, is just so powerful. And I think it really unified everyone that was here sitting at Occupy City Hall. People were painting on their bodies. Like, it was just a really beautiful thing to see and be a part of. So that was something I wanted to just, make a distinction that Kara Walker, her direct pieces are political commentaries that serve as a form of activism. Whereas at the protest, some of the art was relatively random or maybe seemingly disconnected to the actual protests themselves. But it was the use of creating and the impulse of art that served everyone there as a way to be active and be a part of this fight and to find their sort of niche in activism. And that was just the little thing I wanted to highlight. And then I also wanted to show you guys just some images that I made, directly inspired by the people I had seen and met at the protest, as well as the silhouette images that I was viewing while learning about Kara Walker for the Trout Gallery. So I'm just going to go ahead and show you guys just two images that I made. I'm not really going to speak too much about them. Just take a second to look at them. And thank you so much for listening. And we'll talk at the end. Okay? So this is just an image that I took of, the back of people at protests, because it's important to not show people's faces, as sometimes protesters are targets of police overstepping and over surveillance. So these are all just the backs of people that I was seeing, families, couples, proud man, family, another, and just kind of recreating a lot of the scenes that I got to witness, and just some text that I heard at the protest as well. And then this image is actually of my friend Tati. We were at a protest, and I thought so much about the motion of protesting. You're walking forward. Sometimes you have a destination, most times you don't. You're just walking and trusting the people you're with to keep walking with you. And I thought about how sad it was that sometimes it feels like we're walking in circles. We walk ourselves right back into the spot that we were trying to walk out of. So I found this image on the internet of these young kids walking past the Panther Power graffitied on a wall. My friend Tati wearing this Free the Panthers bandana on her pants, and she's walking forward, but it's almost like she's walking to meet behind these kids, and, you know, that just cyclical motion of a government that isn't respecting its people. And so these are my pieces of art as activism. And yeah, thank you all so much again. I really appreciate being able to talk to you guys and get to reflect on this summer. So, all right.
Awesome. Thank you, Maddie, Bethany, and Kayla so much for putting those together. Okay, awesome. Can everyone not see my screen anymore? Just make sure we're on the right screen. Okay, perfect, perfect. So now we are going to start the Q&A session. For the Q&A, you can type a question. At the bottom of your screen, you should see a little button that says Q&A. You can type your questions there, and I can read them to the panelists. If you have a specific question for a specific panelist, please specify that. Or if you would like to ask the question yourself, you can raise your hand and our Trout assistant Claire will let you in to ask the question with your video. And if you guys are having any technical questions too, definitely you can put those in the chat.
And while we're waiting for people to raise their hands, I might ask the first question. And I'd like to ask the question of Maddie, actually. So Maddie, if you want to unmute yourself, in fact, if our panelists can unmute themselves, that'd be great. So Maddie, I'm curious from your perspective, like this was your first, I don't know how much you knew about Kara Walker or how much maybe you thought about art and activism, but I'm wondering about any connections you saw between some of the themes you were talking about and anything that Kayla and Bethany were talking about.
Put me on the spot right away. Yeah, I think just kind of over both of the talks, kind of this idea of looking back and low-key this idea of like nothing's really changed, or some stuff has changed, but you know, I was looking back at, you know, the past in agriculture, and I didn't really mention it, but like a lot of these things, like issues with the USDA still happen today, and there's so many other things I could have talked about. But the same thing with the Kara Walker, and looking back and kind of, you know, looking at the narratives and changing the narratives. And then in Kayla's last image, I think, where it was kind of looking back and where you're walking, I think it's, I definitely saw that kind of connection of looking back and also looking forward at the same time. Sorry, I'm not an art aficionado, but
that's why we want you here. Like, we want to be art accessible, and it's great to hear, you know, how people find meaning in art. And
yeah, I think those are some of the themes I saw, though.
Kayla, I'll ask you a question. I mean, you talked a lot about people coming together for this shared art and activist experience. I just more had a question about how did it feel going out in a crowd like that? I mean, like, did you feel like people were really coming together via different types of art? Was there any like hesitation because of COVID?
I mean, I think honestly, for me and for some others, like COVID is really interesting. Like the other video that didn't get to be uploaded, I was sort of mentioning how the protests have definitely been altered through COVID. You know, people are wearing their masks, people are respecting each other's space to the best of our, you know, abilities to respect space. But I mean, for me, the pandemic is second to racism, like, and it might, you know, make some people uncomfortable, but there is nothing more like rottening to our country than racism to me. What it does and how it infiltrates every aspect of our environment, our dynamics, as much as we try to, in spaces like this, recognize it, acknowledge it, and overcome it. It's such an important conversation that a lot of times I just am tired of having. But I think that, this summer people are tense. So I think because everyone's been in lockdown, some people don't have jobs, maybe some people have been sick or just been by themselves. Like, it's definitely brought a different energy that I've seen, good and bad. But I think when there are a lot of positive moments in the protests, it's because people are yearning to have them. They want to be with other people because they maybe are feeling so alone and scared. And that's, what I was seeing.
Thank you. I have a question from Halima. She says, this question is for anyone. Do you think it's important for art to be accessible rather than inclusive? Perhaps in museums where not everyone gets to see, especially when it's political, in order to reach and resonate with a greater audience?
I'll say something just because Heather and I were talking about this yesterday. One of the biggest things I think I've learned as an art history major, now a junior, is each year, the more art history I take, especially because I've taken a lot of contemporary art recently, the more I hate the museum as an institution. And art history in an academic setting, it's so exclusive and makes people feel like if they're not of a certain status or don't have a certain eliteness about them, they can't be involved in these conversations. They kind of perpetuate the cycle of keeping other voices out. I definitely think that it's important for art to come outside of the museum. And I think a lot of my favorite experiences with art have been outside the museum. Just because it's a lot more personal, and the more people you get to experience it with, the more impactful and more meaningful it becomes. So I feel like the museum environment can just be very isolating, and I feel like you're not really having a productive experience, especially with political art, if it's by yourself in a museum. I talked about in the video how Kara Walker's art works because of introspection and reflection, but I think the most powerful work is happening outside of the museum.
I also wanted to piggyback on that and just add how when we talk about, exclusivity of art, we sort of rarely include the process of art. And that's what I really enjoyed about what I saw this summer, was that they opened up the process of creating to the public space. So it's like sometimes we look at art as only the finished product that is hung up in somebody's home or in a store or in a restaurant or in a museum, and rarely the process that it takes and sometimes how many people it includes. And that's something that I think, if we want to leave some museums to be the ones that you stand back and look at, we have to definitely make room for the art that it takes everyone to make.
And I'll just add here that as an art museum educator, I think that one of our most profound responsibilities in the profession is to create opportunities for art to be accessible. In other words, to work collectively to dismantle the concept of the art museum as temple and transform it into the art museum as forum. It is our responsibility as educators to make art accessible, to engage in conversations like we're having today, where people can express their feelings freely, and that we're making connections between art and people's actual lived lives and experiences, not just abstract concepts. And so I feel that responsibility as an art museum educator. And I think that as we move forward in the art museum world, I'm really hopeful that, and based on what I'm seeing, that art museums are changing, they're transforming. And as much as, change is hard, I'm really excited about what I'm seeing the most avant-garde institutions do in terms of turning the museum inside out, having the community be the ones that make meaning out of their art experiences. So I have some real hope in this area.
Yeah. We have a question for Maddie. Maddie, you got it. Would you say there is a negative perception of Black people in farming? And how do we transform it into something that can be empowering and reclaimed by the Black community?
Big question, bigger than anything I alone can answer. I'm just like one voice. But can you repeat the question again?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Would you say that there is a negative perception of Black people in farming, and how do we transform it into something that can be empowering and reclaimed by the Black community?
Yeah, I don't know if I would, again, this is just like my experience. I don't know if it's necessarily negative rather than just like kind of erased, other than like, I know like as I said, like I didn't know a lot of the contributions of, Black people to agriculture and stuff like that outside of like, I think the only thing I really learned about, as I said, like kind of the relationship between Black people and agriculture was slavery. And, I think that can be changed by changing, the curriculum of, elementary to, through, higher education of how Black people play a role in it. Yeah, I think that kind of answered the question, but I think, yeah, just kind of also just, retraining our own brains on like what actually the relationship between Black people and agriculture there is, and, kind of fighting these institutions like USDA and stuff that, have forced Black people out of farming and, their own land. And, I think people like, Leah Penniman with writing Farming While Black but there's, a bunch of other books about it, are, changing that narrative and like bringing like the true history of, farming to the public. So, yeah, hope that answered the question kind of, yeah.
Yeah, well, we kind of have a follow-up question to that. Don is asking how we're thinking about the farm as something that's sustainable and healthy for people. Do you have any thoughts how we can build a more anti-racist awareness into farming with something like the farmers market that we have around town?
Yeah, I mean, I try like with my position, I've only had this position since like June, to like take opportunities, like I said, like in the newsletter or something like this, to like kind of speak about that and, encourage people to go out and, learn more about the full story of like farming and agriculture in the US. I think maybe that could be, with handouts or something, like little flyers or something about it at the farmers market, if we wanted to like, directly hit our consumers. But yeah, I think just like having the conversations, yeah, just, like I think I read part of the question was like the CSA specifically, like with our CSA, we have like a weekly thing that goes out to them, like putting the history in there and encouraging people to check it out. Yeah. We
have a question from Andrew for anyone. in relation to protest art, how do we challenge ourselves to use aesthetics and the liberal arts in a fashion that continues to empower Black, Indigenous, or people of color, their narratives, without falling susceptible of a capitalistic process or branding? Kayla, you're on mute. There you go.
That's a really good question. It's also a really hard question. I think that, like anything, it's something that you have to ask yourself. It's a matter of authenticity. It's a matter of knowing your genuine participation in something before profiting off of its popularity at the moment. You know, we have these trends where tragedy becomes something that we over sensationalize. We make it, you know, the only thing that's relevant. And, you know, for me, it is. It feels like this is really what's relevant to me. So my art reflects something that I know that I've participated in. I think that goes the same for anyone. You have to find where you fit in to the world you're trying to create and make it from that place, rather than, you know, I'm just trying to make a piece of art that says something, because then what are you saying? You know, if it's not real and it's not true to what you've worked to see or to do. So that's what I would say. The whole corporate capitalism kind of marketing of these times right now, you don't have to fall into if you feel like maybe you're even a little bit outside of the protest art themselves. You just have to ask yourself if you're being authentic. And then if you are, that's it.
That's wonderful, Kayla. And I think I would add to that some of the most specific artists we've seen who have managed to be successful in terms of protest are artists that have chosen an artistic medium that is easily replicated cheaply. And so that's why printmaking, for instance, things like posters are the medium of protest. So artists from very, very early on, people like Keta Kollwitz, during World War I and World War II, are making posters, prints at the time, because they could replicate many of them and distribute them on a wide basis, and everybody could afford to have one, or they would get them for free. And that's one way to eliminate capitalism in the process. And so I think that some of the artists we've seen that are extremely successful and also that are committed to protest have many of their works of art be free or cost $5, and they use media like printmaking or posters as a way to avoid making art elite and also only reaching an elite audience.
I think also something that has definitely come to light this summer that is pretty disappointing is the lack of empathy as far as corporations and their response to the Black Lives Matter movement goes. I mean, I wasn't expecting a lot in the first place, but I think some businesses and corporations have made it abundantly clear their priorities when it comes to, capitalism and making their money through this pandemic and the Black Lives Matter protests. But there have also been quite a few smaller businesses that completely donate their profits to organizations and charities that are helping move the movement forward. So I think that's really encouraging to see. And one way, if you're talking about the relationship between art and anti-capitalism and how you try and change this narrative between the two, I think that's something hopeful to look at.
Kind of running in the same vein, how do we move an audience from awareness to engagement?
I mean, I think in instances like these, I mean, it's a matter of making an audience, because sometimes it's not always just there. You have to go and find it, or you have to kind of talk to yourself for a while. You have to first be the person engaging before you can make other people engage. And I think sometimes that is what lacks in places of academia or places of, you know, like high-end anything, is that the people in control of what the audience sees or is learning about, they're rarely engaged with what they're talking about. So I think it's doing that personal and internal work first, and knowing, how do I engage with the subject matter that I'm talking about? How do I engage with the things that I'm claiming to value or say that other people should know about, before you can really make an audience want to interact with what you're saying or what you're trying to accomplish. And that's what I think. Like, we sometimes look too externally before we've done the personal work. And that's what I would suggest, you know, because everyone has their own audience. You don't have to be an audience member. You can be the person that's teaching others and inspiring others and creating that sort of chain reaction. So, you know how you're engaging before you try to make others engage.
I love this question. Might be Heather, Bethany, Kayla again. Jacqueline says, having seen Walker's work in Los Angeles, it's so powerful to see her work disrupt white spaces. How do you imagine your programming at the Trout Gallery surrounding her work to make an impact on Dickinson's campus and in the larger Carlisle community?
So I'm going to say I'm a little bummed because Carrie Bresci, who's on this webinar right now, has to run somewhere where she's already late. But I was going to put her on the spot to answer this, because she and I have actually been working collaboratively on a grant, a very generous grant from the Art Bridges Foundation, in order to bring Walker's work and her ideas and her concepts directly into the Dickinson community. And so Carrie had some brilliant ideas, you know, and she's someone who's worked with the community a great deal. But some of the things that she has really come up with is first, taking Walker's ideas and figuring out how the issues she raises play out in our community. So, for instance, with Kara Walker, one of the things that some of our projects do is they look at some of the sites of the Underground Railroad in the Carlisle community. And she's going to be teaching classes both for students and particularly students that that don't normally receive a lot of art education classes and don't get the attention that we would like them to have. She's also going to be teaching adult classes in the community where students are going to learn how to make silhouettes, but they're also going to be researching the history of slavery in Carlisle. And they are going to be telling that story in silhouettes that they make themselves. And she has a brilliant idea for a sort of caravan that will parade through the streets of Carlisle on Juneteenth that will capture some of the narratives that aren't told in the history of Carlisle about racism, slavery, but also the lives of Black individuals in Carlisle that aren't often told. And so these are going to be created as part of a community, and that will continue to be sort of used in our community to bring some of these stories to light. And that's just one of the sort of brilliant ideas that she has come up with, and that we're going to be collaborating with her on for really bringing Walker's strategies and her concepts into the community, but really using those in order to talk about the issues we have here in Carlisle and to address the history of slavery in this community.
Are there any other questions? Anyone want to raise their hand? Not seeing any more in the Q&A. Bethany, Kayla, or Maddie, do you have any last thoughts?
I just want to say thank you again for everyone coming. This is the way that we try to piece the pieces back together. So I just appreciate everyone being here.
Awesome. More questions? Well, thank you guys so much for being here, and thank you to all of our panelists, our amazing students, and our partners at the Dickinson College Farm. Thank you so much. We have a lot of other virtual events planned for the rest of the semester, including a student-led discussion series called Trout Unmute, which is premiering on September 15th. And then on October 29th, we will have an artist talk with Steve Prince. So to keep track of all these events, you can always follow us at Trout Gallery, and you can definitely visit our digital engagement site, which is Trout from Home. There's a lot of great activities, resources that are available for all age groups. So thank you guys so much for coming. We really appreciate you, and we will see you next time. Thanks, everyone.